I'd like to welcome you to our event tonight with Dr. Giselle Wilkinson. This event is part of the National Sustainable Living Festival this year, and I am absolutely delighted to be able to interview Dr. Wilkinson and to find out about your research. Dr. Wilkinson has been on a journey. She's recently completed a doctorate on the climate emergency and how we can respond, how we can find a safe passage to a safe climate. So her knowledge and wisdom is needed in buckets, in multitudes. And we are very fortunate to have her provide her wisdom, her knowledge, her strategies, her thinking, and her spirit for us tonight. Just to give you a bit of an overview, we're going to start with an interview. I'll interview Giselle, and then if we have time, and hopefully we have time, we'll go to a Q&A towards the end. And you're welcome to begin thinking about some of the questions that you would like to ask. I want to make sure that you can hear. So if you can just put in the chat, yes, I can hear, that would be great. And that would allow us to just go to the next step and start. Yes, okay, great. Thank you for letting us know. So my name is Jose Ramos, and I'm a researcher and an activist in the area of the commons, community wealth building. And I'd like to just start with an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country where I am, the Dja in Central Victoria, and recognize their continuing connection to land, water, and culture, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I also acknowledge that their land was never ceded, and in most places, a treaty was never created. It's still stolen land and requires our solidarity in addressing this injustice. And what I'd like us to do really quickly is, if we can, in the chat, just put in where you're coming from and the name of the Aboriginal land that you're on. So just in the chat, if you can just say hi in the chat and tell us where you are and the Aboriginal land that you're on. Thank you. And we'll give a couple of minutes to do that. Thank you, Belinda. So Belinda from Boon Wurrung lands. Jackie from Lennox Head. Bunjalung. We have someone on Wurundjeri land. Tongarung country. Jen Webster, thank you. Julie Clark on Wurundjeri country, thank you. Mareki Grace on Boon Wurrung lands. Dr. Giselle Wilkinson is a thought leader, author, and social innovator. She's recently been awarded a professional doctorate in therapeutic arts practice, focusing on mobilizing whole communities to restore a safe climate. Giselle helped instigate the much needed National Center for Climate Restoration with the first of its truth-telling breakthrough forums in 2014, and is currently Breakthrough's outreach director. Co-founding the Sustainable Living Foundation in 1999 and still serving as SLF's president, Giselle was a key part of the decision to run Australia's first global climate emergency convergence in 2007. She again helped to break constructed silences by supporting the Climate Emergency Summit as a cutting-edge landmark event in the 2020 National Sustainable Living Festival. Over those intervening years, Giselle published her first book on sustainable living and eating, The Conscious Cook. She was an active participant in the Climate Emergency Network, Save Climate Australia, and the launching in 2010 of the Transition Decade to Restore a Safe Climate. Giselle enabled the establishment in 2011 of a groundbreaking initiative at Murundaka Co-Housing, demonstrating that less unaffordable, more sustainable urban housing could be built in the suburbs of Melbourne, and that community living simultaneously builds resilience, reduces the cost of living, and shrinks our environmental footprint. Science-informed activist, author, and artist, Giselle is a speaker on sustainability transition and safe climate restoration. Her mission is to help us all explore what it means to fully understand the need for urgent scale and pace and overcome the many hurdles we face. Giselle believes that through proactive collaboration to build and equip the next wave of engaged citizens and activists, the momentum of change can be accelerated to reverse global warming and restore the climate conditions that are safe for all species, our civilization, and future generations. So thank you again, Giselle. And so, yeah, back to that first question. Give us a sense of that personal journey for you.
Mm-hmm. Look, I think like probably most of the people who are here tonight and that I've met along the way, we've had childhood experiences and of immersion in nature somewhere along the way. Obviously, it's either come through our parents and our family, or we've been lucky enough to be exposed to beautiful places. And so as a young child, I spent a lot of my time growing up with my sister and my mum and dad on the Bellarine Peninsula. And my mother taught my sister and I how to deep breathe on the sand dunes from the Southern Ocean. It was like, you know, a way of being present. And we spent time on the Barwon River, we spent time in the mangrove swamps, and it was really just play, but it was definitely connecting to the sentient world. And I think that that continued throughout my childhood. And by year 11, I think there's a slide there with a photo, Jose. Yeah, so that little photo on the left is me in year 11 at school. And by then I was asking a lot of questions. I remember I always felt like I was a bit of a troublemaker, but really I was just a very curious person, I think. And I started to wake up to the world, and that was in 1969. So that was kind of the end of the 60s, which in Australia was sort of when a lot of big waking up was going on in our country, and continued into the 70s. So then I actually studied to be an art teacher, and not long after I left that work with the education department and moved to live on a community, which in Western Australia, which back then was actually called a commune, and experienced community in a whole new way, which also was another thread that started in my life. I had visited a kibbutz in Israel. So, you know, these sort of threads started back then. And I spent some time at Damanunda in northern New South Wales. That was in the mid-80s. But that was participating in a sustainable living course that ran for the best part of that year. So they're the sort of the background things that brought me up until mid-80s. And from then on, the threads started to weave together. So that by 1999, when the Sustainable Living Foundation was actually, you know, co-founded by myself and Ian Walker and Steve Ingrell, it felt like coming home in a way, because all these different things that I'd been doing in my life had a place and were put to a good purpose.
Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, grappling with climate emergency, you know, it's very challenging, you know. What were some of the critical and catalyzing events that led to you really engaging with that?
Okay, well, it really did come through the Sustainable Living Foundation. And at a certain time, it started in 1999. We ran our first festival as the foundation in 2001. And I got a bit burnt out at that time. I actually got diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and I had to pull right back for a couple of years. And in that time, Philip Sutton came on board and was our president. And around about 2003, the council was brought up to speed, was exposed to the whole idea of the fact that climate change, which we were all thinking was way off, way down the track, we realized it was coming at us really fast. And there was a lot of resistance in that council, as well as there is, we've all had to struggle with that to get through that and to accept that it is as bad as we now know it to be. And so there was an event that we ran back then called the Big Melt, and it was just talking about what was happening at the North and the South Poles. That was before the satellite photos started to appear. There weren't satellite photos back then.
Mm-hmm.
This was on data being put together by scientists. But when the satellite photos came, it was a real shock, because they showed that the situation was worse than the data was telling us.
Mm.
So the IPCC reports, which hadn't even mentioned ice melt.
Yeah, they've always been conservative.
Yeah, totally conservative and late. It takes them a couple of years to get all that data and get it all meshed together and get all the sign-offs and the political sign-offs to then be able to release a report. So by the time we get them as the public of the world, they've been diluted and sort of dumbed down in a sense. Yeah. So we were seeing with those satellite photos that the situation was way more dire, and it was coming on us even faster than we realized.
Yeah. So it was really just responding to what you saw before you, with your own eyes and through the media. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's right. But it was coming from very few places. Yeah. We were hunting around for people, for other people who understood that this was as critical as it was. And they began to emerge, they began to appear, and there was a lot of trying to put that out as well. And of course, there was a lot of resistance to that too. Yeah.
And then there was a decision to do the doctorate. So what was that? I mean, what brought you to that decision?
Yeah, I made that decision in 2010. We'd run some events. We'd been working on it for, by then, 7 or 8 years. And it was very slow, the uptake of the understanding and the engagement. And we would talk to the Premier and politicians and feel like we were getting somewhere, but still it wouldn't translate into action. And it became so frustrating and so perplexing. And I wanted to understand better what was going on. I realized that they're just thinking that they didn't understand, that they were ignorant of the science, of the physics. That wasn't the whole story. Yeah. Or just pointing to, the fossil fuel industry as a vested interest. That wasn't even the whole story. It was much bigger and deeper than that, and more complex. So I wanted to understand that for myself, and then try and articulate it and work through what I now term the hurdles.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's jump into the actual issue. So, there's the tremendous amount of misinformation, dissembling, and confusion around climate change for a variety of reasons. But given your research and your knowledge, can you give us in the most clearest and stark terms, what is the situation? What is the challenge today?
Okay, there's a chapter in the doctorate titled "What Must Be Fully Understood," because one of the problems we have is that many of us feel we understand, but actually the understanding only goes so far. And then there's a point at which people will say, I know enough. I don't want to know anymore. Don't tell me anymore. I know enough. It's a crisis. We have to do something about it. But unless we fully understand it, we can't begin to properly address it. So that chapter really goes into the detail of that. So basically, I think if you bring up the first of the graphs, so there are some graphs which I will explain carefully. But we can't sort of do this without showing some of this information. So this graph is about showing, it's really showing carbon dioxide, that aqua color, as the most abundant of the human emitted greenhouse gas emissions, greenhouse gases, and by far the largest climate warming impact of the long-lived greenhouse gases. And that, if you see the red line going from the right-hand side where the number 1 is, and it goes in and then down to what is basically 1990. If you know, if we were at the 1990 level now, that's where we would be. And that's at 1.0. But in fact, we are now 1.45. And that is degrees above warming. And that is 45% more than it was back in 1990. So basically, in the time since 1990, we've increased that by 45%, which is an astounding amount, considering that we've known all that time, like we've had the knowledge, and the knowledge has been growing, obviously, but we were taking action back then in the late 80s and early 90s, and the action has not translated into a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So if you go to the next slide, it explains it in a slightly different way. So this is more a thermometer. This is put together by the Climate Action Tracker. That previous one was by NOAA, which is a very trusted source. This is as well. So you can see that where we are now, we're still in the green zone, but what we're saying is it's dangerous already. We're seeing it, aren't we? You know, what's happening in Texas right now, for instance, and they're just dealing with unprecedented cold weather that's freezing the gas lines and freezing the wind turbines, and they're totally obviously unprepared for this. And so where we are now, even with the dangerous events that we're seeing happen, we're not prepared, and we need to, that's one of the things we have to do, is to deal with what are called fat tails, which are the less likely events, but the bigger impact events which could happen. We need to be ready for them because they are almost inevitable on the trajectory that we are on, as that previous graph showed, we are still on. This thermometer also shows that even with the pledges and targets that are in place from countries all over the world, still bring us in at 2.6 degrees of warming, which is way too hot. It's a disaster zone. And the current policies which are in place, they still come in at nearly 3 degrees of warming. So they're completely inadequate. That's the timelines are out, the targets are out. Even the optimistic targets still bring us in over 2 degrees of warming. So, you know, obviously that all needs to be addressed, and that's got to come from somewhere, the impetus to do that.
When I was reading your chapter, I found this very confronting because, you know, I'm a person who really likes to focus on alternatives. And so I've known about a lot of environmental problems for a long time, since I was very, very young. And in a sense, I try to focus on what are the new emerging ways to respond. But going back to the actual, you know, the numbers and the situation today was incredibly confronting, and forced me to, you know, think, okay, well, I can't keep living the way that I'm living. There's something, what is my role, or what my place? So yeah, I mean, I think this chapter is, you know, very powerful, but also was a little difficult, and churned a lot inside me. But anyways, please, back to you.
I think just from what you're saying there, Jose, there's 2 things that come up for me. One is that reaction is completely normal, and we have to find ways to help people face this fearful situation and come through it. So, I mean, I know from my own experience that being engaged in some way is an antidote to despair. That has been my experience. And Margaret Klein Salomon asked me once, have you ever met an activist who hasn't had their dark night of the soul? And I haven't. It's something, it's like almost a rite of passage that you come through, but it's important to come through it, not be stuck there. And we know ways to help people do that. So that's part of what this work in the doctorate is about. It's about helping people fully understand, have that experience, come through it, and get on to making useful contributions. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that you were saying about changing in your life, it'll come up later in this presentation, but how we reprioritize now is really important. And so I say that we need to make this issue as equally important, equally top priority, along with that, whatever our other top priority is, be it family, business, whatever it might be. This has to sit up there equally with this as a top priority, because if this isn't addressed, whatever our other top priority is going to be in jeopardy.
That's right.
So if we move on to the
next
other
slide.
graphs, just quickly. So this one is basically showing that it again shows that the policies and pledges and targets are dangerous already. They're very high risk. So that blue area, the pale blue area, that's the current policy pledges and targets. They're all up above 2 degrees, so high risk. And the area above in grey is actually where there are no policies. That is what's called business as usual. So that's no change. That is where Morrison refers to going back to normal. Normal is that bad graph going in that wrong direction, business as usual. So we have to make some changes. We have to, we have to change our whole economy.
Yeah, normal is a ostrich with its head in the sand.
Yeah. The orange line there that you can see, it says optimistic net zero targets. You can see that still comes in at 2 degrees, over 2 degrees. And yet the term net zero target sounds so great, doesn't it? You think, how much better can you do than that?
So that's full decarbonization of major systems, transport and manufacturing.
Yes.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, every sector.
Construction.
Every sector.
Right.
Yep.
And that's still 2 degrees because of all the CO2 that's been locked in to the system already.
Yeah, there are lag times and things that, and because we've left it so late now, we've lost 20 years. We've a lot of bullshit has come in the way, and we have actually lost 20 years, or more. So net zero is not enough. We have to go beyond zero. That's why Beyond Zero Emissions is called Beyond Zero Emissions, BZE, which is an outstanding organisation doing work in this field. And so that's where the whole discussion about drawdown, pulling down the load of historical pollution that's sitting up there right now, that has to be brought back down, and that'll take time. We can get to zero emissions very fast. I believe we need to be aiming for zero emissions by the end of this decade. So 9 years is what I'm saying. And I believe that's possible as well. And I'll go on to explain why it's possible to even hold that belief. It sounds a bit wild, but it's true. But the drawdown will take longer, and we have to be careful about that. So, and also when we go to net zero emissions, we will stop putting up the particulate pollution, the little pieces of carbon and aerosols that are in the atmosphere currently cooling our planet.
Right.
We will lose that benefit. So we have to we might have to offset that with some other mechanisms to cool the planet, the poles at least, and help protect the biosphere while we're doing that drawdown over decades. Okay, so the final one is a simplified version of this. basically, there's the business as usual trajectory. The Paris Agreement levels it out a little bit, but we should have, you know, it's too high still. Like 3 degrees is extremely hot. We would be seeing a lot of death and mayhem and, you know, species extinctions and all sorts of terrible plights there. 2 degrees is still bad. It's still going to mean lots of people on the move, and other problems. It'll mean, you know, already we've got the if you look at you know, Vietnam and Bangladesh and low-lying countries and how populous they are, just the amount of sea level rise that's already beginning to be felt is going to have diabolical effects in those areas. And those people, especially Bangladesh, will only be able to escape to the sea because India's fenced Bangladesh completely with razor wire and armed guards. And then Indonesia, which is thousands and thousands of islands, is also, you know, highly populated country. So with thermal expansion of the oceans being greater around the equator, and with ice melt, the combination of two, it puts those areas at high risk even at 2 degrees. So zero, the yellow line, zero safe climate, is really the only pathway that makes sense, is really the only pathway that's worth fighting for and that dedicating time and effort to. So if you look at it, it's pretty vertical. How could we possibly achieve that? That is what emergency response mode looks like. So we have to understand what an emergency response mode is.
And it's so unprecedented. I mean, human beings have never had to deal with this type of challenge where we're actually not, you know, I mean, fully taking responsibility for our impacts on the planet, because we've been displacing and externalizing costs for thousands of years as civilizations, but also this idea that that we have to actually manage the climate, and we have to engage in drawdown at this scale is, yeah, it's an unprecedented era for human beings, you know, to wrap our head around. It's science fiction, really. You know, the idea, like we have science fiction scenarios where, you know, we go to a planet and we start to terraform the planet to make it livable for humans, right? This is essentially what you're talking about for Earth, you know, making Earth livable for humans because we've made it unlivable. But it's science fiction. It's that radical a break from historical precedent.
Yeah, I think when you say, you know, managing the climate, that brings, you know, dread and fear to a lot of people's hearts and minds, and rightly so, because there are so many things that we don't know, and we have to stay within the world of science and physics and understand that, and that those laws are not debatable. So we have to work in that zone, and there's more work to be done to understand how it can be done. But the thing is that what we've been doing is not managing the climate. We've been mismanaging it. So we've been impacting it in a very, very dangerous and detrimental way, and unknowingly and also knowingly. So I think management's a whole lot better than mismanagement, and that's where we're at now. You have no choice.
Yeah. I'd like to just turn to what you said earlier. You know, we had wasted decades in the 80s and 90s. You know, you use the word bullshit, and there's that age-old expression that if we don't learn from history, we're going to be doomed to repeat the same mistakes. So I wanted to ask about, you know, many scientists and activists already knew about global warming in the 80s, but action was effectively derailed. What can we learn about why we failed to respond? And how are those lessons going to help us now in actually addressing that?
Yeah. Okay, well, look, the doctorate research showed that there were many reasons why our responses haven't been adequate. And many of the hurdles that are in our way, we've put in our own way. So self-blocking is actually a big factor, our own psychological resistance to, getting on with it. So that is there, but I'm not going to talk about that in this to answer your question. You know, Maggie Thatcher actually addressed the Tories, I think it was in about 1987, and she said, it is our duty, this, as Prime Minister of the UK, she said, it is our duty to solve the problem of climate change. She said, it's our duty to look after the landscape and the land. And she was a chemist, she was a scientist. She fully intended that to be the case, but in the end resigned from that pledge and backed away. And that coincided with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan bringing in and championing economic rationalism. And that was the beginning of a sort of the change in what the way capitalism was being expressed in these countries. And so a lot of things were getting privatized, and some checks and balances were being removed, protections were being removed, etc. So that kind of opened the doorway for more rampant exploitation, actually. But I think one reason why they resigned from it was because initially the expectation was technology would be able to solve climate change. But when it was looked at a bit more closely, it wasn't just technology. It has a role to play, absolutely. But behavior change was also a big factor, and that was not understood well. It was like a sort of a scary concept for people who are focused on how business is going to make the change for us. There's not as much money to be made out of behavior change as there is out of new technology. So I think that was one reason why the emphasis went really hard onto technology. And once the technology wasn't going to be able to do the whole job, it was, let's leave it to the next incoming Labor government, see if they can deal with it.
Well, and it also challenges the growth model, which is much more baked in than a problem like the ozone layer. The ozone layer was solved by getting rid of CFCs, but global warming's growth is baked in, economic growth, and exactly as you're saying, that the neoliberal approach to governance and economy is antithetical to that. So, yeah. I'd like to also ask you about, in your doctorate, you discuss the importance of moving into emergency mode. And I'd like to ask you what does that mean, and what can we learn from history about some of the emergencies we've had in the past and how we responded to them?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, firstly, I'd like to say I just experimented with emergency mode myself in around about, I don't know when it was, about 2006. I just thought, tomorrow morning, I'm going to wake up in emergency mode and see what's different. But the next day I woke up and I'm going, okay, I'm in emergency mode. I'm in the same place. I'm going to do the same things. What actually is different? And what I discovered was a whole lot of things became less important. And actually it was a relief. It was sort of like focus, and I was able to get much more centered about what I needed to be doing, and I could let go of other things that it's not that they weren't still important, but maybe other people, they were being looked after elsewhere. So it enabled me to try and find where my best contribution could be made. But with emergency mode that we're talking about here, an emergency response mode that we as a nation in Australia can get into, and that other nations can also do. Yeah, that's what that graph is showing, and that's what we need to do. We've got to get to beyond zero emissions and do all those things. So it's pretty hard to imagine. And it's so, failure of imagination is one of the things that gets blamed for where we're at. But actually it is hard to imagine how the hell can we do this? But there are some examples we can look to. And one is, I think if you put up the next slide, it's a book cover.
I'll do that in a second. Yep. Just give me a
So
second.
this is about the Manhattan Project. If you want to imagine, if you want to find out what an emergency response mode looks like, get a hold of this book and read it. It is actually a really gripping book. And it's, you know, it's a true story. It's obviously, it had devastating consequences, probably quite possibly unnecessary. The death toll for the dropping of the 2 bombs, the atomic bombs was just horrific. And you know, I think that says something about the caveat that has to go on things that, you know, we guarantee, you know, you have to say, look, it's safe passage and net benefit's got to be part of whatever decisions are made. There are a lot of differences. This is a project that ended in devastation. This is a project that was top secret. But the things that it shows you is what happens when a country is fully behind a project. And the urgency was so great. This was a race against Germany to get the atomic bomb. So before Adolf Hitler got the bomb, the Americans wanted to get it, the British wanted to get it, and they started with just some very vague theories, not much on the ground, but it's a riveting story, and it shows you what is the difference between capacity and capability, and how we need both. So we do have capability inside us as human beings to pull out all stops and to do amazing things. And we do have a capacity when we combine these efforts together, when we collaborate, when we're resourced, when the commitment is 100%. So emergency response mode would be very different from the Manhattan Project, but that's an example of what an emergency response mode looks like. And the next slide is another example that we can point to. And that is what happened to the Apollo 13 expedition to the moon. It was a moon landing that didn't happen because the, you know, one side of the spaceship blew out from some unforeseen glitch that had actually been put in place 2 years prior. And the astronauts were stranded in space. They had to live inside the landing module for a few days. They nearly died of sort of air poisoning, too much CO2 in their own atmosphere. They had to cobble together a filter to be able to breathe, talking to the people, the think tanks and the brain trust down in NASA and Cape Canaveral, trying to, with the scientists down there all going crazy. Most of us have seen the movie. And they figured out a way of, with no manual, they'd never even imagined this possibility. They figured out a way of using the gravity of the moon to create a slingshot effect, to slingshot that little capsule back into Earth's atmosphere at exactly the right trajectory so it didn't burn up. And those astronauts landed safely. So they surmounted what appeared to be an insurmountable problem. It's a really inspiring story, and that's the kind of inspiration that we need. And we're not getting. We don't get these stories brought to us. We don't get told the gravity of the situation to even need this level of inspiration to be able to tackle it. There's constructed silences around this problem, and there's a whole thing about don't frighten the horses. So we're just not being told the truth, and that's not going to help in the long run or the short run. So does that help?
Absolutely. Those are great examples. And I'm starting to think, you know, where are those examples today of, you know, really dramatic breakthrough changes where we are doing, you know, moving towards that zero emissions, but also the drawdown strategies. And, you know, I, like many other people, have Paul Hawkins' book, Drawdown. So, you know, I think we really need, like you're saying, we need that imagination, and we need to be able to understand what that landscape of change looks like. And on that point, I'd like to ask you, you know, using this you know, this idea of we're in a struggle, or, you know, we're in a war, right? This emergency mode. Given where we are now, and also, you know, what we've learned from history, what in your mind are the key battles that we're going to need to engage in? Where are we going to have to create the changes to, you know, to get Apollo 13 back home safely, you know,
Yeah.
to create a safe climate?
Yeah, well, there's many, but there are three key ones. And one is to do with policies and the whole political domain. And, you know, we need to go, there are breakthroughs happening all over the place, but they need scale and pace. They need to be scaled up to be able to, you know, to have the effect that's needed. We can't be dealing with prototypes and little trials. And they need pace. They need to be brought on much faster, like we've just seen with the whole COVID vaccine. 10 years, what would ordinarily take 10 years of research has been done in less than a year. We need that kind of pace to be applied to this situation now. So scaling pace for the breakthroughs that exist. And then with policies and the whole political domain, this is back to us again in the community, people. We have to make our democracy way more active. It's got to be participatory democracy. And voting is important, but it's not enough. We need to be getting our voices heard, left, right, and centre in our own lives, but also telling our state and federal elected reps that this matters to us and we want to see action. And they need to be just reminded about that on a really regular basis. And it does have an effect. It is like their hip nerve to have their voters talking to them in that way. So I think those graphs that you saw earlier also show how policy and the political domain are important, and how they're falling short at the moment. So that's a job for us, for all of us. And then the media and the misinformation campaign that's coming through the media is also something that we need to address. And, you know, Australia is blighted by the Murdoch press. This is just an example of to what lengths the Murdoch press will go to. That's the Australian with the blue line going around it, to not talk about something that's related to climate change. So with our devastating fire season last year, all the newspapers in the world were covering it as a disaster, as the disaster that it was. And of course, the connection to climate change was being made again and again and again. It was, you know, it's hard to deny, which is why it is not on Murdoch's front page. He's talking about, you know, the races at Hanging Rock and, you know, secret police bid to ban alcohol, anything but climate change. So Rupert Murdoch set out many years ago, so many years ago, he's a very old man now, to be an influencer, to create influence. And he influences in a very big way in our country. In Queensland, there are no major news outlets which are not Murdoch owned. So you can change election results with that kind of power. And that's something that has to be dealt with. And there is a campaign, Kevin Rudd's working on it, and others, Malcolm Turnbull, and I think there's a petition. Well, we have to, you know, get behind that campaign as well. But the third thing is the citizen engagement, and that's where my doctorate focused. So that is looking at bringing in the values-based engagement. So that's where we look at, well, what really matters to us? What are we wanting to save and why? What do we care about? And how we can, you know, feel that unity around those things. It talks about that. It also brings in people power, and there are lots of evidence of you know, how people power can have political wins. We need change knowledge, and that's like a new field, but a lot of that was identified in my research as well. So that's you know, I'm aware that it's starting to become a thing, and that can be taught, and that can make ordinary citizens a bit more informed and a bit more effective in terms of how we communicate to one another, to friends, family, neighbours, workplaces, etc., about these things. And we need new leadership, and we need more breakthroughs. So, you know, the citizen engagement is on multi fronts, and it's talked about in the doctorate. I created an educative activist framework in a wiki that goes to a lot of the hurdles and comes up with suggestions and ideas on how they might be overcome. So the hurdles, which currently it looks like a big mountain in the road in front of us, we can't climb. When you get up closer, it's actually a whole lot of boulders, many of which can be rolled away or climbed over, and we can get rid of them. They are within our means. So it's really about empowering ourselves to get on with that job, tackle them all, basically.
And so kind of, so we've got these battles, we've got citizen engagement, we've got media, misinformation, policy, political change. What in your mind do we need to win? How do we prepare? What do we do?
Well, we know we have to build a bigger momentum than we've got, because the graph's telling us we're not getting on top of it. We need more people. There's just not enough people who are throwing their full weight at this problem. This is where the reprioritizing has to happen. We need to look at all the decisions made in our lives, all the things that matter to us, and look at how those priorities might have to change, and how we can bring this issue from down the list right up to the top, equal with the other top priorities in our lives right now. So we need to build the next wave of activism to get our governments in the right place to be able to change their minds or change government or bring about the transformative change. And to build that next wave, we need to be able to equip people and help them deal with all those psychological things that we touched on before, and deal with how to become informed enough to feel confident to have the conversation, and and meet the turned shoulders and the don't want to know. That's the constructed silences that we have to find the courage to push through.
Yeah.
So those sorts of things. I think we need to be able to see also the threat clearly, fully, see the solutions, and have a plan. And that package of threat, solutions, and plan lets you hold fear in a way that you can live with it and have hope.
Yes, because we need a pathway forward. You can't just tell people there's a huge problem and you're screwed. We actually have to provide empowerment and also the way to engage, right? How do we engage? And I'll just quickly say, like, it was only last year where I've done plenty of activism, but it was only last year where, before the council elections, I actually emailed the different people that wanted, that were on the ballot, and asked them, are you prepared to declare a climate emergency for, Maston Ranges? And it was interesting, the responses that I got back. And a lot of them were like, yeah, we're ready to do it. And that gave me very clear ideas. So there's these kind of micro movements that we have as human beings. And some people are slower than others, but we've got to get all of us there together. I want you to just speak very quickly. And I want people to queue a few questions, because we're going to go 5 minutes over, and we can ask one or two questions if you have. Really quickly, give us the 1-minute version of the educated activist framework. Just what is that all about? How does that help? How is that going to help people to engage with the issue, the problem, and respond?
It's going to broaden the understanding of what the hurdles are that we're facing, because mostly when I talk to people, they'll come up with 1 or 2 or 3 things that are stopping us. But in fact, there's many more. And some of them are subtle and in our own lives, in our own thinking, in our own biases. So it broadens the awareness of it. And then for each one that's identified, there's some suggestion of what might be done about it. So sometimes it's about approaching a peak body or a certain organization who's got that expertise, who can turn their attention just a little bit this way and clarify and overcome a hurdle, address it. So it's got a lot of that, but it's just really actually also the beginning of that work too. And I'm looking for volunteers to help develop it further. We're talking about setting up a course, running a course of some sort. I want to develop some, online products and maybe some pamphlets and other things that will help bring things into more manageable bite-sized bits.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that. So really look forward to seeing that. And also this is a call out to everyone that, volunteers needed to get that material out and activating. Okay. So we have a question from Nia, and we can do a couple of questions. So if you have someone else has a question, please put it in the chat. Nia asked, do you believe in what the Extinction Rebellion does? Does it actually help this cause?
Okay, well, I feel like there are many different ways of approaching this, and we kind of need to bring as many things to bear as possible. I don't think it's like this one's going to be better than that one, because that will reach a certain audience, a certain target market. Another thing will reach another audience. And actually, we need everything at the moment to raise awareness, to galvanize people, so we can begin our own education process, as well as, becoming more active and effective. I think that it can be very inspiring, Extinction Rebellion, and nothing's perfect. So whichever way you go, there's going to be, there'll be pros and cons, I guess. But yeah, I think we need everything brought to bear.
Mm, mm. And also the work of Greta Thunberg also comes to mind, which is just phenomenal. The challenge in the heart coming from, youth, and the importance of really stopping the system, being able to intervene in the system and stop it in its tracks so that it can see itself, so that people are forced to reflect. There's different strategies, and you cover many of those strategies in your thesis. There's another question here. How do you think the experience and of COVID-19 gave us can be translated into the climate emergency? So how can that experience and that challenge be translated for global warming?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's great in that respect that we do have this example that's affected everyone, because we can relate to it. And what we saw was an emergency response mode quickly came into being, where governments were making bipartisan decisions, agreeing on things, where we saw a conservative government making some quite, socialist decisions for the common good, and protecting us as a nation. And we saw us as a population being supportive of that, compliant with that to a very, very large extent, because we also, I was proud of Australia for its willingness to see the common good as, more important than the individual. And it's been big suffering for a lot of people, and stressful, and damaging for businesses as well. Absolutely. But look where we are in the world now with COVID-19. I'd rather be here.
Mm.
So yeah, COVID-19 has shown us that we can do it.
Right. We have a question from Colin Hawking. Hi, Colin. You ask, how do you think we can get beyond our usual tribe to build capacity and action with others who aren't in our primary bubble?
Oh, wow, that's such a great question. I think this is where multi-organizational collaboration can play a role, where we have to just get very proactive about collaborating outside our bubble, and begin to make alliances with others, whether it's a different bubble but in the same geography, or different geography but the same bubble sort of thing. So I think there's ways of spreading it out, testing the waters to do that. But collaboration is going to be important to build up our momentum and to access greater resources that we're going to need.
Yeah, great. And Emily Heaney asks, can you explain a bit more about how we can reach net zero, beyond zero by 2030? that might be quite a entailed response, but can you give Emily at least something, and then she can probably follow up after.
Yeah, well, I'd urge Emily and anyone else to get onto the BZE website and start reading up some of that information. It's all there. They're very, very robust reports. They've never been debunked. And they had their stationary energy report was delivered in 2010. It's been around for quite a while. So yeah, it's obviously renewable energy's got a huge part to play in all this, and changing our fleet across to electric cars, which will happen, but we need it scaling up and scale and pace. So the buzzwords out of this presentation to take with you are scale and pace.
Scale and pace.
All this change.
Scale and pace. Yeah. And also there's Paul Hawkins' compilation Drawdown, which is item by item, which is very good.
It is. I mean, I think my only comment there is that some of them will take time. Like educating girls is a great thing and it will have a long-term effect, but you know, we need to be really looking at 2030 as a critical year, and a lot has to happen in that now very short space of time. We've left it this late, so this is what we're faced with, but we can do it if we put our minds and hearts to it. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're gonna wrap up because we're already 5 minutes over. There is a last question here, but what I'd like, if you don't mind, Giselle, to give us your last key points that you want to leave us with, and maybe just answer this last person's question in the process. The anonymous question: how can we help people raise climate emergency up the list when there are so many systemic barriers and other challenges in people's lives? You know, how can we do better, more individually and collectively? So if you can just give us some points to leave us with, I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, we do have to try and walk the talk and inspire people by what we do as best we can. I think we have to SWAT up, and we have to step up, and we have to speak up. I think it's important to take a small step or a large step when you feel motivation stir your blood. Take it. Like if it's coming out of this presentation, take a step, carpe diem, and start where you're at. So wherever it is in your life where you are, there'll be a way of making some sort of step forward on this, communicating, taking action. And if you can't find time, if you can't yet liberate time to put to this new priority, then find an organization that you can trust and get behind it. And I can recommend SLF and BZE as a couple that I think are outstanding. The National Centre for Climate Restoration Breakthrough is another one. And donate there, time or money. And automatic debits are, of course, very appreciated. So I think that there are ways to do it. And then it's, you know, with our collective wisdom, we'll find the ways to crack into it. But we start close to home and leave the bigger questions till later. But for those who are ready to tackle them, start now. So it's about, the 5 things are: reprioritize, use your voice, the buzzwords, scale and pace, collaborate, and then finally I'd really recommend connecting with nature, because that is a very galvanizing force for most people. It's the precious, beautiful world that we want to protect. So it's a good place to be. Yeah.
Thank you for your wisdom, and thank you for your commitment for so many years, for giving your life and your life's work. There's a attendee who asks, are you able to put on a workshop or a challenge or something that we can join? And my answer to that is yes, but Giselle needs support. She needs volunteers. She needs people to donate time and money. And so the last thing I'm going to do is share your the website. So people can go to that website and get in contact with Giselle and let her know, I'm ready. Let's do this.
Yep, there's a donate button there, and there's a button there to connect to the network that will allow you to get updates emailed to you occasionally. And yeah, you can email me. That would be great. I'd love to hear from people.
Yeah. And thank you for inspiring us and giving us hope and giving us a pathway for change.
My great pleasure. Thank you, Jose. Thanks everybody for coming.
And with that, thanks everybody for being here. We will get the recording up in due time, and appreciate everyone's involvement and questions and comments. Again, if you want to find out about Dr. Giselle Wilkinson's work, her doctoral thesis, Mobilizing Whole Communities to Restore a Safe Climate, a copy of that will be coming out very soon. You can find out about that on her website. So please visit her website, please get in contact, educate yourself, get involved, and let's make this happen together.